The rain drummed against the tin roof of the small, weathered house, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding in 8-year-old Daniel Carter's chest. He sat at the kitchen table, fingers smudging the ink of his homework as he squinted in the dim light of a flickering bulb. His mother, shoulders hunched from another double shift at the diner, stirred a pot of thin soup on the stove. "Ma," Daniel said, voice small but determined, "when I grow up, I'm gonna make sure you never have to work like this again." His mother turned, her tired eyes softening. She wiped her hands on her apron and crouched beside him, brushing his unruly brown hair from his forehead. "Oh, Danny," she sighed. "You just focus on school, all right? That's how you'll make it." But Daniel had already seen enough. The eviction notices slipped under their door, the way his mother's hands shook when she counted their meager savings. He didn't just want to make it. He needed to. By 16, Daniel had learned the value of sweat. Before school, he delivered newspapers. After, he bagged groceries at the corner store. Weekends were spent mowing lawns or fixing bikes for spare change. His hands were calloused, his back often sore, but his resolve never wavered. One evening, his boss at the grocery store, Mr. Callahan, leaned against the counter, watching Daniel stack cans with meticulous care. "You're a hard worker, kid," he remarked. "Most boys your age are out causing trouble." Daniel shrugged. "Got no time for trouble, sir." Mr. Callahan chuckled. "That attitude will take you far." He paused, then added, "You ever think about college?" Daniel's throat tightened. College was a luxury they couldn't afford. But the idea lodged in his mind like a seed waiting for water. The scholarship letter arrived on a Thursday. Daniel stared at it, heart hammering, before sprinting to the diner where his mother worked. She read it, hands trembling, then pulled him into a crushing hug. "You did it," she whispered. But college was no fairy tale. Between classes, Daniel waited tables, pulled all-nighters in the library, and swallowed his pride when classmates mocked his thrift store clothes. He buried himself in his studies, fueled by the memory of his mother's exhausted smile. Then, senior year, his big break came, an internship at a prestigious finance firm. The hours were brutal, the work unforgiving, but Daniel outworked everyone. By graduation, they offered him a full-time position. The city skyline glittered as Daniel, now 26, adjusted his tie in the mirrored elevator. His apartment was modest, but it was his. His mother's hands no longer shook when she paid bills. Still, he wanted more. Late nights turned into promotions. Promotions turned into opportunities. By 30, he was a vice president. By 35, he launched his own firm. Then, one rainy afternoon, much like the one from his childhood, he stood before a crowd, accepting an award for Entrepreneur of the Year. Cameras flashed. People applauded. But all he saw was his mother in the front row, tears in her eyes, her hands smooth and unburdened. At last, he had climbed the mountain, and the view was worth every step. The applause still echoed in Daniel's ears as he stepped off the stage, the polished award cool in his grip. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward him, their questions blending into a cacophony. "How did you do it? What's next?" His mother waited at the edge of the crowd, her smile radiant. When he reached her, she cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away tears he hadn't realized had fallen. "Look at you," she whispered. That night, in the quiet of his penthouse, Daniel sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's lights stretching endlessly below. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, an unfamiliar hollowness gnawed at him. For years, his life had been a single-minded pursuit, more, higher, further. But now that he stood at the top, he realized no one had warned him about the loneliness of success. The emails never stopped. The deals never slowed. Daniel's calendar was a mosaic of back-to-back meetings, flights, and late-night strategy sessions. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Naomi, had started leaving protein bars and Advil on his desk with silent disapproval. One morning, as he scrolled through yet another urgent request, his phone buzzed, a hospital number. His mother had fallen. He canceled his entire day, racing to her side. The doctors assured him it was minor, just a sprained wrist, but the sight of her in a hospital gown, frail under the fluorescent lights, sent a jolt through him. "You look terrible," she chided gently when he sat beside her. Daniel laughed, but it came out ragged. "Hot calling the kettle black." She studied him, her gaze knowing. "When's the last time you slept? Or ate something that didn't come in a takeout box?" The question hung in the air. He didn't have an answer. Daniel hired a caretaker for his mother, despite her protests. He told himself it was temporary, just until he cleared his backlog. But weeks bled into months, and the backlog never shrank. Then, one evening, Naomi knocked on his office door long after everyone else had left. "You need to see this," she said, handing him a spreadsheet. It was a projection, his company's growth, his personal net worth, all the metrics he'd once obsessed over. At the bottom, she'd added another column: hours worked, days without break, missed family events. Daniel stared at it. "What's this supposed to be?" Naomi didn't flinch. "A cost-benefit analysis." The truth hit him like a punch. He'd traded everything for success, time, health, moments with the people he loved. And for what? A number in a bank account? Daniel flew to the coast, to a quiet beach house he'd bought years ago and never visited. For 3 days, he did nothing. He slept. He walked along the shore. He called his mother and listened, really listened, as she told him about her garden, her book club, the stray cats she'd been feeding. On the 4th morning, he sat on the porch with a notebook and pen, not to draft a business plan, but to ask himself a single question: what now? The answer came slowly in fragments. He wanted to work, yes, but on his terms. He wanted time. He wanted to breathe. When he returned to the city, he called a board meeting. "I'm stepping back," he announced. The room erupted. But the IPO, the investors. Daniel held up a hand. "I'm not walking away, but I'm no longer running myself into the ground for a title." A year later, Daniel's life looked nothing like it had before. He still worked, but remotely, delegating more than he ever had. He'd sold the penthouse for a smaller home with a yard, where his mother now lived with him, her laughter filling the halls. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she nudged him. "Remember that little boy who promised to take care of me?" Daniel smiled. "Took me long enough to figure out how." She squeezed his hand. "You got there. That's what matters." And for the first time in years, Daniel believed it. Success wasn't a summit to reach, it was the peace of knowing you'd climbed well. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Daniel knelt in the dirt beside his mother, helping her plant tomatoes in their small garden. His hands, once accustomed to signing contracts and typing furious emails, now carefully pressed soil around fragile seedlings. "You've got a gentle touch," his mother remarked, brushing a streak of dirt from his cheek. "Always did, even when you were little." Daniel laughed. "Funny, I spent years thinking success meant being ruthless." She gave him a knowing look. "And now?" He sat back on his heels, considering. "Now I think success is having the time to get dirt under your nails." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. It was in moments like these that Daniel realized how much he'd missed, not just with her, but with himself. The relentless drive that had propelled him forward had also blinded him to the quiet joys of simply living. The idea came to him gradually, like dawn breaking after a long night. He was at the local community center, volunteering to teach a finance workshop for teenagers, when it struck him. The kids, bright-eyed, hungry for knowledge, but lacking resources, reminded him so much of his younger self. After the class, a lanky boy named Javier lingered behind. "Mr. Carter," he began hesitantly, "how did you really make it?" Like, no inspirational stuff. The truth. Daniel studied him, the too big hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the defiant hope in his eyes. He thought of all the unspoken struggles, the sacrifices no award ceremony ever acknowledged. So he told him. The sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, the times he'd nearly broken, and most importantly, the people who had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. Javier absorbed every word. "So, It's not just about working hard. Daniel shook his head. It's about working smart and knowing when to ask for help. That night, he drafted a proposal for a foundation, one that wouldn't just give scholarships, but mentorship, internships, real guidance for kids like Javier. Like him. 5 years later, the Carter Foundation had changed hundreds of lives. Javier, now a college graduate working at a tech startup, returned every semester to speak to new students. Daniel's mother, to her delight, had become the unofficial grandma of the program, baking cookies for study sessions and writing encouraging notes to every participant. Daniel himself still consulted occasionally, but his days were no longer ruled by boardrooms and bottom lines. Instead, he found joy in the small victories: a student landing their first job, a family breaking the cycle of poverty, the spark of understanding in a young person's eyes when they realized they were capable of more. One evening, as he reviewed applications for the next cohort, Naomi, now the foundation's director, leaned against his doorway. "You know," she said, "we could expand. There's demand in 3 more cities." Daniel set down his pen. "Let's do it. But slowly. Sustainably." He grinned. "No more 100-hour work weeks, remember?" Naomi smirked. "Funny how you've become the voice of reason." The gala was the foundation's largest yet, a glittering event celebrating a decade of impact. Daniel, now in his 50s, stood at the podium, gazing out at a room filled with faces he'd come to cherish. Alumni, donors, volunteers. His mother, beaming in the front row, her hair silver, but her spirit as bright as ever. "I used to think success was a finish line," he said, his voice steady. "But the truth is, it's a circle. You climb, you learn, you lift others as you go. And if you're lucky, you realize the greatest reward isn't what you achieve, it's who you become along the way." As applause filled the room, Javier, now a confident young professional, handed him a small box. Inside was a keychain, a simple metal circle. "For the next generation," Javier said. "Pass it on." Daniel clasped it tightly, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The struggles, the growth, the love. And he knew his story wasn't ending. It was just beginning anew. The morning after the gala, Daniel sat on his back porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watching sunlight dance across the garden. His mother hummed softly as she arranged fresh-cut flowers in a vase. The peace of the moment was interrupted by his phone buzzing insistently. "Daniel Carter," he answered, expecting Naomi with last-minute foundation details. "Mr. Carter, this is Eleanor Grayson from Global Business Review," said a crisp, unfamiliar voice. "We'd like to feature you in our Visionaries Changing the World issue." Daniel hesitated. Media attention had never been his goal. "I appreciate the offer, but the foundation team deserves the spotlight more than I do." Eleanor chuckled. "Modest. But we're interested in your journey, from Wall Street to philanthropy. It's how you redefine success." His mother caught his eye, nodding encouragingly. Daniel sighed. "Let me think about it." As he hung up, his mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "You should do it. Your story could inspire others to rethink their paths too." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Or it could just turn into another rags to riches cliché." She smiled. "Then tell it your way." The Global Business Review interview took place in Daniel's home office, surrounded by framed photos of foundation students and his mother's paintings. Eleanor, a sharp-eyed journalist in her 40s, zeroed in on the contradictions. "You walked away from CEO titles, yet your foundation operates like a Fortune 500 company," she observed. "Why not just retire?" Daniel leaned back. "Because retirement implies the work is done. The system that nearly broke me still chews up kids like Javier every day. I can't fix it all, but I can widen the ladder." Eleanor's pen paused. "And if someone reading this says, 'I can't afford to step back like he did,'" Daniel met her gaze. "Then I'd ask, can you afford not to? Burnout isn't a badge of honor." I learned that too late. The article ran with the headline, "The Millionaire Who Measured Success in Sunsets." Not everyone applauded his choices. Online forums buzzed with critiques. Privileged guy preaches balance after cashing out. Even old colleagues questioned his messaging. At a finance conference, a former rival cornered him. "You make it sound like ambition is a disease, Dan." Daniel sipped his water. "Ambition isn't the problem. It's the lie that you have to sacrifice everything else for it." The man scoffed. Spoken like someone who's already won. Daniel left the conversation unsettled. That night, he journaled, "How do I talk about balance without dismissing those still in the grind?" The answer came from an unexpected source, Mia, a foundation alumna working in labor rights. Over coffee, she slid a proposal across the table. "Corporate wellness programs are band-aids. We need systemic change, starting with your old industry." Her idea? A coalition of execs advocating for policies like capped work hours, mandatory vacation, and mentorship rotations. "You've got the credibility to get them in the room," she said. Daniel scanned the proposal, excitement building. This could be bigger than the foundation. Mia grinned. That's the point. The coalition's first meeting was a minefield. Skeptical CEOs argued profitability. HR reps cited cultural shifts. Daniel shared his own story, the panic attacks he'd hidden, the relationships he'd neglected. After hours of debate, Sarah Lynn, CEO of a major tech firm, finally said, "What's the ROI on not burning out your best people?" The room fell silent. By the end of the quarter, 20 companies had signed the Sustainable Success Pledge. The media dubbed it the Carter Effect. Amid the momentum, Daniel's mother fell ill again, this time seriously. He canceled all commitments, turning her bedroom into a sunlit sanctuary. Nurses came and went, but he handled the nights himself, reading her favorite novels aloud. One evening, she whispered, "You don't have to fix this one, Danny." Tears clogged his throat. "I know, but I want to be here." Her hand, paper-thin, squeezed his. "This is what success looks like." She passed peacefully, surrounded by love. At her memorial, hundreds came, foundation kids, neighbors, even old diner coworkers. Javier, now a father, handed Daniel a letter. "She wrote this for you. Made me promise to wait till now." The note read, "Don't you dare slow down. Keep climbing. Just remember to enjoy the view. Love, Ma." Daniel folded the letter into his wallet, next to the first dollar he'd ever earned. The following month, he announced the Carter Kim Initiative, merging his foundation with Mia's labor advocacy. Their mission, redefining success, one life at a time. As cameras flashed, Daniel glanced at the front row, empty now, yet somehow still full. He knew she was proud. The silence in the house after his mother's passing was deafening. Daniel found himself wandering from room to room, running his fingers along the spines of her books. The collection of ceramic frogs she'd kept on the windowsill, the well-worn recipe cards in the kitchen drawer. Each object carried the weight of memory. One rainy afternoon, he opened her closet and was enveloped in the faint scent of her lavender perfume. His breath caught as he reached for the old cashmere sweater she'd worn every winter. Slipping it on, he could almost hear her laugh. Naomi found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by photo albums. Without a word, she sat beside him and placed a steaming mug of tea in his hands. "Tell me about this one," she said, pointing to a picture of a gap-toothed Daniel holding up a blue ribbon at a science fair. And so he did. Story by story, memory by memory, the house began to feel less empty. The lawyer's office was hushed when Daniel arrived to settle his mother's affairs. He expected paperwork, bank accounts, the deed to the house. What he didn't expect was the small, battered lockbox the attorney slid across the desk. "Your mother left specific instructions about this," the lawyer said. "She wanted you to have it when the time was right." Inside, Daniel found 3 things. A stack of letters addressed to him at various ages, each labeled with milestones like "when you feel lost" or "when you fall in love." His childhood piggy bank, still heavy with coins. A faded Polaroid of his mother as a young woman, standing before a boarded-up building with the words "Carter's Diner" barely visible. Taped to the bottom of the box was a note. "Dreams don't expire, Danny. They just wait for you to be ready." The building in the photo still stood on the edge of the old neighborhood, though it had been a laundromat for 20 years. Daniel stood across the street, watching customers come and go, his mother's words echoing in his mind. That evening, over dinner with Javier and Mia, he floated the idea, what if we reopened it? Not just as a diner, but as a training ground for foundation kids. Mia's eyes lit up. A social enterprise restaurant? We could. Pay living wages, offer culinary certifications, reinvest profits into scholarships, Javier finished, already scribbling notes. 3 months later, the sign went up, Carter's, EST 2024 beneath the original EST 1978. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the diner on opening morning. Daniel stood behind the counter, showing a nervous teenager how to work the vintage espresso machine. Outside, a line stretched down the block. At noon, an elderly man in a newsboy cap took a seat at the counter. Daniel froze when he recognized Mr. Callahan, his old grocery store boss, now nearing 90. About time this place came back, the man grumbled, then winked. Your mother's biscuit recipe better be on the menu. Daniel slid a plate across the counter. Would I dare? As the diner buzzed with laughter and clattering plates, Daniel caught his reflection in the chrome coffee pot and, for the first time, saw his mother's smile in his own. Daniel waited until his 50th birthday to open the first letter. For when you miss me, the envelope read. Her handwriting brought her voice alive. Danny, if you're reading this, I'm probably nagging the angels about their halos being crooked. Stop crying this instant. Yes, I know you are. Here's what I need you to do. Go eat something terrible for you. Dance badly to our song. And most importantly, keep telling your story, especially the parts where you failed. Those are the bits that help people the most. He laughed through tears as Unchained Melody played on the old diner jukebox, their song. At the counter, a group of foundation kids watched in amusement as their usually composed mentor swayed alone, eyes closed, perfectly offbeat. The diner's success became its own challenge. Demand outpaced their capacity, and when a viral review called it the heart of the community, Daniel faced pressure to franchise. We could change more lives if we scale, Javier argued during a heated meeting. Mia countered, or we could lose what makes it special. That night, Daniel sat at his mother's old sewing table, now his desk, and opened another letter. For when you can't decide, flip a coin, she'd written. Not to choose for you, but because when that coin's in the air, you'll suddenly know what you're hoping for. The next morning, he announced their decision. No franchises. Instead, they'd create a replicable model for local nonprofits to open their own version, with Carter's providing training and seed funding. A nor'easter was battering the diner windows when the bell jingled. Daniel looked up from inventory to see a soaked teenager shivering in the doorway, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. You the guy who hires strays? The kid asked, chin jutting out defiantly. Daniel slid a hot chocolate across the counter. Depends. You any good at peeling potatoes? As the storm raged outside, 17-year-old Mateo Lopez told his story. Foster homes, dropped out, but damn could he make an omelet. By closing time, Daniel had offered him the spare room above the diner and a apprenticeship. One condition, Daniel said as they shook hands. You have to let me teach you how to balance a checkbook. Mateo rolled his eyes. Yeah. Hero complex. I read the article. But when Daniel turned away, he caught the kid discreetly wiping his eyes. The call came at 3 a.m. By the time Daniel arrived, Carter's was a smoldering shell, faulty wiring, the fire chief said. Mateo stood barefoot on the sidewalk, clutching the only thing he'd grabbed, the framed photo of Daniel's mother that usually hung by the register. Insurance would cover rebuilding, but the human cost cut deeper. Their staff. All foundation kids, huddled under blankets, watching their futures turn to ash. Then something remarkable happened. By dawn, the community descended. Mr. Callahan organized a breakfast brigade at his church. Foundation alumni started a crowdfunding page. Even Daniel's old Wall Street rivals sent checks. As the sun rose, Daniel gathered everyone in the parking lot. We'll rebuild, he promised. But for now, he gestured to the food trucks already rolling in. We work from here. The rebuilt diner opened 6 months later, its walls adorned with photos of the community effort that resurrected it. The new sign bore 2 dates, EST 1978 Reborn 2026. At the ribbon cutting, Mateo, now assistant manager, handed Daniel a gift. Inside was a charred coffee mug salvaged from the fire, now glazed with gold lacquer to highlight its cracks. Kintsugi, Mateo explained. The Japanese art of fixing broken things with gold makes them stronger where they broke. Daniel ran a thumb over the gleaming seams. It wasn't perfect, but neither was he. Neither was life. And maybe that was the point. On the 10th anniversary of his mother's passing, Daniel sat at the diner counter with a stack of her unopened letters before him. Outside, autumn leaves swirled in the breeze. He'd saved one for today, for when you wonder if it mattered. Her words were characteristically blunt. Of course it mattered, you silly goose. Look around. Listen to the laughter. Taste the pie. You better still be using my recipe. You didn't just climb your mountain, Danny. You built bridges for others to cross. Now eat your vegetables and go fall in love already. The bell jingled as Naomi entered, her arms full of files. Ready for the board meeting? We've got 3 new cities approved for the Carter-Kim model. Daniel smiled, tucking the letter into his wallet beside the others. Lead the way. Somewhere, he knew his mother was laughing. The board meeting ran late into the evening, but Daniel's mind kept drifting back to his mother's words. Go fall in love already. He chuckled to himself as he locked up the diner. After everything he'd built, she was still nudging him toward happiness. As he walked home through the quiet streets, his phone buzzed. It was Mateo, now running the diner's night shift. Hey boss, forgot to tell you, some lady came in asking about you earlier. Said she knew your mom back in the day. Left this for you. Attached was a photo of a yellowed envelope on the diner counter, addressed in handwriting Daniel didn't recognize. The next morning, Daniel arrived before dawn to find the envelope still where Mateo had left it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a faded photograph of his mother in her 20s, arm in arm with a woman he'd never seen before. Both wore waitress uniforms, grinning in front of Carter's original diner sign. The note read, Lillian said if anything ever happened to her, I should give you this. Meet me at booth 3, Thursday, 2 p.m. Hey. Daniel's hands trembled. Who is this woman? What secret had his mother entrusted to her? The woman arrived precisely on time, early 70s, steel gray hair piled in a bun, wearing a familiar lavender perfume. She slid into the booth and studied Daniel with sharp blue eyes. You look just like her, she said without preamble. I'm Alice, your mother's first partner, in business and otherwise. The world tilted. Daniel gripped the table. You mean? Alice nodded. This diner was supposed to be ours. But 1978 wasn't kind to women in love, let alone women in business. She pulled out a stack of yellowed papers, a partnership agreement, signed in both their names, then crossed out. Lillian bought me out when the threat started. Daniel's coffee went cold as Alice told the story his mother never had, the harassment, the broken windows, the ultimatum from the bank. Why tell me now, he whispered. Alice touched the photo. Because she wanted you to know the full truth before. She hesitated. Before you make your own choices. That night, Daniel tore through his mother's belongings with new purpose. In the back of her recipe box, he found what he'd missed before, a sealed envelope labeled, for when you meet Alice. Her words were raw in a way he'd never seen. Danny, if you're reading this, I wasn't brave enough to tell you myself. Alice was the love of my life, but I chose safety over us. Then I had you, and you became my whole world. But know this, every biscuit recipe, every late night shift, every sacrifice was worth it because it led me to you. Don't make my mistakes. Love boldly. Rain pattered against the windows as Daniel wept for his mother's silenced heart, for the stories she'd buried, for the courage it took to build a life from fragments. Daniel invited Alice to help redesign the diner's interior. On the back wall, beneath the original Carter sign, they commissioned a mural, 2 young women laughing over coffee, their faces blending into a crowd of diverse faces that represented the diner's new legacy. At the unveiling, Alice stood frozen before the artwork. Daniel squeezed her shoulder. She'd be proud, he whispered. Alice wiped her eyes. No, kid. She'd be grateful. The diner became a bridge between Daniel's past and future. Alice joined their board, bringing decades of restaurant experience. Mateo launched a culinary training program for LGBTQ plus youth. And Naomi's steady, brilliant Naomi, started joining Daniel for late-night walks after closing. One evening, as they paused on the bridge overlooking the city, she turned to him. "You know, your mom was right about one thing." "Yeah, you're terrible at dancing." When she kissed him, Daniel tasted coffee and possibility. Years later, on the diner's 50th anniversary, Daniel stood before a packed house, Alice beaming at one table, Naomi and their adopted daughter at another, generations of foundation kids filling every booth. He raised a glass. "To Lillian Carter, who taught me that success isn't about how high you climb, but how many hands you hold on the way." As the cheers rose, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the mural's two laughing women. Somewhere, Daniel knew his mother was finally free. And her legacy, like all the best recipes, would keep nourishing long after the baker was gone. The discovery came on a slow Tuesday afternoon while Daniel was reorganizing the diner's storage closet. Behind a stack of old menus, he found a battered 3-ring binder with "For Danny" written in his mother's looping script across the cover. Inside were not just recipes, but stories, handwritten notes in the margins of every page. "Your first solid food. You gobbled this carrot puree like a starving puppy. Made this chicken soup when you had the flu at 8. You swore it had magic healing powers. The cake we baked for your 16th birthday when money was tight. You pretended it was better than store-bought." Asterisk. Daniel sank onto a flour-dusted stool, the binder trembling in his hands. This wasn't just a collection of instructions. It was a love letter written in butter and sugar, a chronicle of their life together told through meals. Naomi found him there an hour later, still poring over the pages. "We should publish this," she said softly, reading over his shoulder. Daniel shook his head. "It's too personal." Naomi turned to a page with a splatter of what looked like chocolate sauce. "That's exactly why the world needs it." The Lillian's Kitchen cookbook became an unexpected bestseller. Food bloggers raved about the unfiltered humanity in the recipes, while literary critics praised its unintentional poetry. But the real surprise came when the James Beard Foundation called. They wanted to honor the cookbook with a special award. At the ceremony, Daniel stood before a room of culinary luminaries, holding the grease-stained binder. "My mother never measured ingredients precisely," he told the crowd. "Her secret was always tasting as she went, adjusting to the moment. That's how she parented too, improving as needed, forgiving her mistakes, savoring the messy process." Afterward, an elderly woman approached him. "I knew your mother briefly in the 70s, she said, pressing a napkin into his hand. On it was written, "The blue box under my bed." "You're ready now." The blue box contained 3 things. A diary from 1978, its pages filled with his mother's anguish over losing Alice. A savings passbook showing decades of small deposits labeled Danny's future. A sealed envelope marked for when you understand. Daniel waited until the diner was closed to read the final letter. "My dearest Danny, if you're reading this, you've learned about Alice. I need you to know, what looked like my greatest regret became my greatest blessing, because it led me to you. But here's the truth they never tell you about love. It isn't finite. My heart had room for both of you. It just took me 50 years to admit it. Don't wait that long. Love, Ma." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall as Daniel sat at the counter where his mother had once served pie to truck drivers, understanding at last the full weight of her sacrifice and her joy. Daniel and Naomi married in the spring, beneath the diner's awning. Alice served as officiant, her voice breaking only slightly when she declared, "What was once separated has now been made whole." For their cake, Daniel used his mother's recipe, the one from his 16th birthday. As he and Naomi fed each other the first slices, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. Later, as the band played Unchained Melody, Daniel spotted Alice dancing slowly by herself, eyes closed, mouthing the words to someone only she could see. On the diner's 25th anniversary under Daniel's ownership, He handed the keys to Mateo in a surprise ceremony. "You built this," he told the now-grown foster kid. "Now it's yours to steward." That same week, he and Naomi officially launched the Lillian Carter Fellowship, a program providing housing and mentorship for LGBTQ+ seniors in the food service industry. Alice became its first director. At the ribbon cutting, Daniel addressed the crowd. "My mother spent her life feeding people. This time, we're making sure no one at life's table goes hungry for food, for love, or for dignity." Daniel turned 60 on a golden October day. Per tradition, he selected one of his mother's remaining letters for when you become a grandparent. He laughed aloud at her presumption until later that evening, when Mateo and his husband arrived with news they'd been approved for adoption. Daniel read the letter by candlelight that night. "Danny, you'll try to resist giving the baby sugar. You'll fail. You'll worry you're repeating my mistakes. You're not. Most importantly, when they hand you that child, you'll finally understand the terrifying, wonderful truth. Love isn't something you earn. It's something you pass on. Now go spoil that kid rotten. Love, Grandma Lillian, *. The diner still stands today, though the neighborhood has changed around it. Tourists come for the famous mural, foodies for the award-winning pie, but the regulars know the real magic is in booth number 3, the one with the brass plaque that reads, "Lillian Carter. She made the coffee strong and her love stronger." *. If you visit on a quiet morning, you might see an older man with kind eyes sitting there, scribbling in a notebook as sunlight filters through the blinds. Ask him about the recipes, and he'll smile. Everything worth doing, he'll say, takes time, patience, and a willingness to get a little messy. Then he'll slide a plate of warm biscuits your way, perfectly imperfect, just like life. Daniel sat in the quiet of his home office, surrounded by blueprints and sketches. The Lillian Carter Fellowship had outgrown its original space, and now he was drafting plans for a new community center, one that would combine affordable housing for seniors with a culinary school for at-risk youth. The design featured a ground-floor diner, of course, with a replica of the original Carter's counter. Naomi leaned over his shoulder, tracing a finger along the rendering. "You're really building her dream, aren't you?" Daniel smiled. "Ours too." Shovels pierced the earth on a crisp autumn morning. Daniel, now silver-haired but still energetic, stood beside Mateo, Alice, and Naomi as the first foundation was laid. A crowd of foundation alumni, former diner staff, and community members gathered to watch. Alice, gripping Daniel's arm for balance, whispered, "Lillian would have loved this." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. She'd have run the whole project herself and bullied the contractors into working faster. The laughter that followed carried across the construction site like a promise. During the center's construction, Daniel received an email from a woman named Elena Martinez, a retired chef who had worked at the original Carter's diner in the 1970s. She arrived for their meeting with a cardboard box full of memorabilia, yellowed photos, old menus, and a stack of letters from Lillian to the staff. "She called us her diner family," Elena explained, her hands trembling as she passed Daniel a photo of his mother laughing behind the counter. When Alice left, Lillian made sure none of us ever felt alone. Daniel added the photos to the growing archive in the center's lobby, where visitors could trace the diner's history, from its humble beginnings to its rebirth. The Lillian Carter Community Center opened on what would have been Lillian's 75th birthday. The dining hall was packed former foster kids who had worked at the diner, elderly locals who remembered the original, and a new generation of culinary students. Daniel stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. "This place was built on my mother's belief that everyone deserves a seat at the table," he said. "Not out of charity, but because a meal tastes better when it's shared." As he cut the ribbon, the kitchen staff passed out plates of Lillian's famous biscuits. The sound of clinking silverware and laughter filled the room. Years later, long after the center had become a neighborhood institution, Daniel found himself awake at 2 a.m., scribbling in an old notebook. Naomi stirred beside him. "Can't sleep." He shook his head, just thinking about how none of this was part of the plan. "I thought success was supposed to look a certain way, corner office, big salary, all that." But this. He gestured vaguely toward the window, where the lights of the center glowed softly in the distance. Naomi kissed his temple. You built something that will outlast you. That's better than any stock portfolio. Daniel smiled. His mother had been right all along. Success wasn't a destination. It was the people you brought with you. On his 70th birthday, Daniel took his granddaughter, Lily, to the diner for pancakes. She sat in the same booth he had as a child, swinging her legs as she drowned her syrup in whipped cream. Papa, she asked between bites, was Grandma Lillian really as cool as everyone says? Daniel slid an old photo across the table, his mother flipping a pancake with one hand, grinning at the camera. Cooler. Lily studied the picture, then nodded solemnly. I'm gonna be just like her. Daniel's eyes burned. You already are. The diner's 50th anniversary celebration lasted all weekend, but Daniel saved one tradition for himself. On Sunday night, long after the crowds had gone, he slipped behind the counter for one final shift, just him and the quiet hum of the kitchen. He wiped down the countertop where countless meals had been served, ran his hand along the worn edge of the register, and stood for a moment before the mural of his mother and Alice. Then he flipped off the lights, just as he had seen his mother do so many times. The neon open sign flickered off. Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware of the small, sacred moment. But as Daniel turned the key in the lock, he knew. Some legacies never really close.